All right. Welcome, everybody. Officially, I know there's been a great conversation going on. For those of you who arrived early, I will just say Roger and somebody from the recruitment team will always be here about a half hour before each of these sessions to answer questions for a little bit of office hours. So, welcome to everybody who's joined. My name is Jim Hennessy, and I am part of the recruitment team here at Code Platoon. And we're all excited to have you guys here officially for the kickoff of Intro to Coding Live. Whether this is your first time taking a coding class or you're here to brush up on your skills, you've come to the right place. And hopefully over the next 3 weeks, you guys are going to build a strong foundation, learning about functions, variables, and lists in Python. These are the core building blocks, not just for this course, but also for the coding exercises that are part of applying with Code Platoon, or actually any other boot camp that you might want to go to. Now, if you are thinking about applying to Code Platoon, and we kind of hope you are, because we think it's great, we've got a couple. I want to remind you of a couple of important upcoming deadlines. We have deadlines for all three of our programs coming up in August. August 10th is the deadline for Buffalo cohort, which is our full-time 15-week full stack software engineering immersive program. August 17th is the deadline for Delta cohort in our AI Cloud and DevOps program, which is an updated curriculum that will launch with this Delta cohort. It now includes a deeper focus on AI and cloud engineering, plus AWS cloud certification. And then at the end of August, August 31st is the deadline for India cohort, which is the evening and weekend full stack software and engineering program. Each of those programs is created for the military community to hopefully get you guys going in a career in tech. Hope you're interested in those things, and we're going to be here to help you. And the best part about these programs isn't just the curriculum, but it's our role at Code Platoon to try to make it as accessible as possible for you guys from the military community, and hopefully either via VA benefits or our scholarship programs, you'll be like most of our other students and have no out-of-pocket cost in attending, or if something very little. So a couple of logistics before we dive in. First of all, we have a Slack community. You should have all received an invite to our Intro to Coding Slack community. This space is yours to connect with other students in this class, alumni who've gone through it. Use it to find practice partners, crowdsource solutions to things, or just encourage each other. If you didn't get an invite, drop a note in the chat, and Roger or Kayla or myself will get you added. Also, recordings. If you miss a class or join late, don't worry about it. Every session is recorded and posted to a playlist on our YouTube channel. We'll send the links out by email, post them in Slack. You can even check out playlists from previous Intro to Coding live sessions. So check that out. We've said this, attendance isn't mandatory in this class. You can attend a session, you can skip a session, whatever. But we do like to keep track of who's participating. So please make sure you fill out the daily attendance sheet each time you attend a class. Roger's sharing a link to it. It's also, I think, tagged at the top of the Intro to Coding Slack channel. This is just so we can know where you are. So if you come up and you have a question, we can say, oh, hey, you missed this session. We can help you catch up. And then lastly, while you're going to be learning and the fundamentals of Python in this class, the best way to learn coding is really simple. It's practice, 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 as my piano teacher used to say. Roger's going to share with you a repository of some exercises. Make time to work through them on your non-class days, or even a little every day. It'll make a huge difference. You're going to learn a lot of stuff, but practicing it is the only way you're going to get it. So lastly, I introduced myself. Also on this call from the recruitment team is Danny Marcano. He is our recruitment manager. And Kayla, who's been playing moderator. We're here to help you. Like I said, we'll be here 30 minutes before each of these classes to answer questions about applying or the programs or anything you're curious about. Also, you can email us. You can Slack us. We're in the Slack community as well. So that's a little bit to get us going. And I want to officially introduce, even though he's been chatting away in here, Roger De La Garza. He's your instructor. Roger is not only a kick-ass software engineer, but he's also an Army vet, and we like to tout him. He's also a Code Platoon grad, so he's kind of a living proof of what's possible when you combine hard work and the right spirit. Those of you who don't have any coding experience, Roger was there a few years ago, and now he's not only a software engineer, he's also given back and one of our instructors. So, Roger, you can take it from here.
Yeah, well, welcome everybody. I know I talked a little bit about myself earlier, but as Jim said, my name is Roger. I'll be your instructor for the remainder of this 3 weeks. Um, I did serve in the military. I was a combat engineer for 8 years. I, was feeling a little lost. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I decided to transition to tech at the last year of my time in the military. Um, I knew I wanted to do coding. I just didn't know how to do it, right? And I'm sure that's where you guys are right now. You probably went on YouTube and you're like, what do I need to be a software engineer? The different coding languages. And there were just so many things out there. And it was just kind of all over the place, right? I went to my nearest library. For those of you who've been to Fort Bragg, I was stationed in Fort Bragg, my last duty station. So I went to the Fort Bragg library. I signed out as many books as they allowed me to, I think like seven of different coding languages, right? It was like C sharp, it was Java, Python, because I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew like I want to code. Uh, so I'm going to look at all these different coding books. And it was just a lot. There was one book that stuck out specifically, which is the Python Crash Course. That's the book that I ended up using to learn. And I was self-taught for the most part for the first 6 months of my journey into coding. I spent my nights on the kitchen table with my laptop open, the book on the side. I would read line by line. I would code everything out. I encountered Code Platoon, and within those 6 months, I took um, the time to learn coding. To apply to Code Platoon. The application process for me took me like 2 months to complete. By the time I was done, I was accepted to Code Platoon. I went through their full stack immersive program for software engineering, and I was a part of Uniform Platoon. When I graduated from Code Platoon, I volunteered as a teacher assistant because I just left service. I had nothing else really going on for me yet. I'm still applying to places. So I was like, let me go ahead and apply as a teacher assistant. I did, and throughout my time as a teacher assistant, an opportunity came up. The instructor for one of our courses had to kind of step out for personal reasons. So I volunteer. They offer me. They're like, "Hey, Roger, you seem to be always asking for work. Well, here's some work. Do you think you can teach this class for the last week?" I was like, "Absolutely." I taught one of our courses for last week. They were thoroughly impressed with my performance, and they extended me a role with the company. And I've been teaching with Code Platoon ever since. Um, and here I am now, right? So, I am the proof of that. So I was in your same shoes. I was in service. A lot of the people in Code Platoon are military oriented. But yeah, I mean, does anybody have any other questions before we continue, specifically from Kayla, Daniel, or Jim, before we actually dive straight into today's lesson?
Feel free to email at any time throughout the lesson too if you have any quick questions. I'm throwing in my Code Platoon email address in the chat. Super simple, Danny at codeplatoon.org. Yeah, ping me away if something comes to mind throughout the session or therefore after.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Danny. Thank you, Kayla, and thank you, Jim, for kicking us off. We're gonna go ahead and start off today. We have a very busy day today, right? Specifically because it's day one. So, for those of you who are not aware, last week we held an info session for today's lecture. In that info session, walked us through installing, well, not really installing, but setting up our GitHub code space. Oh, Dante, I feel like I've seen you before. I think we are at last class. Nice to see you here. But during the info session, we talked about setting up our GitHub code spaces to be able to run our code. So while we get set up, what I need from every single one of you guys is to go to Google, and I want you to type in GitHub, right? GitHub is what we are going to be using for our curriculum. I should be sharing my screen now, but you're going to navigate to google.com and you're going to type in GitHub. The logo is this cat here, but it should be the very first link that you come up on, and that's going to take you to it's going to take you to GitHub's homepage. I'm already signed in, so you're kind of seeing my profile right now. But um, you're going to want to create a GitHub account, right? And this GitHub account is going to be important. One, because it's something that's used in the industry. You're going to require GitHub for any of our courses that you're going to take part in, but also because GitHub is going to allow you to be able to run some code on your browser and also have access to our curriculum. So for those of you who did not attend that info session, right, and maybe just came in a little bit late, please take the next 2-3 minutes and I want you to create a GitHub account. And while we go through that, I also want to ensure that you guys also fill out the attendance form that's in the chat. For anyone that might have joined a little bit late, I'm gonna go ahead and drop it in again, just to ensure that we got the attendance. And as Jen mentioned earlier, attendance is not mandatory. If you guys show up one day and then don't decide to show up at all for the rest of your time here, that's okay too. I won't take it personal, right? I understand Intro to Coding is a free course, right? The curriculum, really, you can go to the curriculum on your own without any help. We have a self-paced curriculum as well that you can do on your own. What Intro to Coding is really, it's just going to be a live version of that, right? But then you might be asking yourself, what's the point, right? We have a self-paced, why would I show up here? Well, you have an instructor that is here for you guys at a lot of time to provide you answers to any of the questions that might have came up while you're coding by yourself, right? So many times as you're working through some of these exercises, if you're learning on your own, you might have some questions that you aren't so quite sure of. You might be looking through Google, Stack Overflow. You might be asking ChatGPT these questions, and it gives you a very elegant answer. But it's too elegant and too high level. You're like, or what is it? What are you talking about? It's using a bunch of buzzwords and acronyms that you don't understand. Like, I don't even know this. Or it might give you a much more complex answer to your question. So the perks and pros of having an intro to coding live session is that I'm here for you guys from the hours of 6 to 9 to provide you with any questions that you may have, right? Additionally, I also do offer one-on-one sessions for those of you who feel like you might need a little bit of extra help. The intro to coding live sessions are going to go from 6 to 9, and I'm teaching the entire time. What that means is really most of your learning isn't going to happen realistically during your time during the course, right? Because it's going to be a lot of information that you're going to be taking in. You're going to be watching me, you're going to be trying to run your code. We might have some exercises to go through. But really, the thing about coding is that you have to put in the time behind your keyboard, right? You need to be able to go through the headaches of trying to solve a question or an exercise, your code not working, and then putting yourself in a position where you have to problem solve and use critical thinking skills to reach a solution. For example, Dante, you were in my last class, is that correct? I feel like I remember you.
Yeah, that's correct. But
Yeah.
I haven't touched a line of code since we finished, so
Yeah.
I'm brand new all over again.
Absolutely, but Dante here can probably tell you. You probably just can't sit here and just watch these recordings and then be like, okay, I'm good to go. I'll show up to the next class and now that'll be good enough. Realistically speaking, you want to ensure that once class is over, on your free time, right, between classes, on the weekends, you are going through the exercises that are given to you guys to ensure that you're studying up on this code, right? And you're going through these headaches. You have to put in the miles behind your keyboard, right? Coding, like a lot of stuff in life, is a perishable skill, right? If you don't touch it, if you don't code it, you're gonna forget it. All right. We ourselves are not computers, which is why AI seems to be doing a lot better than us sometimes. in regards to knowing some of this information. We are going to forget this stuff. And if you don't practice it, you're going to lose it. Even myself, right? There's going to be times where I'm going to find myself in a situation where I might have some difficulty with my code. When we go through the mini project week, I'm going to put myself in the spot where I'm going to have to solve it uh, live, right? I don't have an answer key to any of these exercises, by the way, right? All the exercises that we have, there's no answer key, right? When you guys ask me about a question, I have to kind of look at the question, read through it, like, okay, this is how you do it, right? Or this is where you're going wrong. Specifically, the mini projects at the end of it. And the reason for that is because I don't want to cheat and just give you the answer. I want to show you what it looks like, right? When when you read the problem, you're like, what is it asking from me, right? You see my cogs turning, and then you realize how I'm solving the problem, how I dissect it, I break the problem into smaller problems, and how I engage the exercise, right? And that's not a skill that you're going to learn just by looking at YouTube videos or just sitting in front of your computer watching me code. It's something that you're going to learn by putting yourself in that situation and actually coding, right? So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and assume, does everyone have a GitHub account? Did everyone fill out the application process? Are you good to go? If you are not, give me a thumbs down. All right, see some thumbs up. Awesome. Uh, uh, Tamika, is that how you pronounce your name? I'm sorry. Okay, awesome. Hey, first time go. Good stuff. All right, well, we'll give it another second. So cameras, they're not mandatory. Really, if you want to turn them off, you guys can. I highly encourage you turn them on because it helps teach. It's a little bit easier for me to teach when I can see y'all's faces. When I see a face of confusion, it reminds me to stop, slow down, and ask for questions. Like, does anybody have any questions about this? So if you guys can turn on cameras, I encourage it. If not, that's okay too. It won't hurt my feelings. It just makes it easier for me to teach you guys. I see some messages here. All right. So curriculum, where's the curriculum? So the curriculum can be found within our Slack channel. So you've heard this before during our introductions, but in the Intro to Coding Slack channel, you're going to find a tab at the very top, which is going to say bookmarks. You're going to find 4 different things in here. The very first one is going to be the Intro to Coding Live curriculum. I'm going to go ahead and copy this link, and I'm going to drop it in the chat for the day so we can get there quickly. But when you click this, it's going to bring you to the location of where our curriculum is hosted at. All right, so for those of you who were here in the info session, you've already seen this process. For those of you who've seen the video, you know how this is going to go. We're going to do a slow little recap for those of you that were not present. But unfortunately, because we did offer the info session, I'm going to tell you guys to reference the video if you guys get stuck, right? The reason for the info session is so we have a smooth transitions on day 1, so we can go straight into today's curriculum because we do have a lot to cover. If you have any issues with the installation process and you want a more consolidated video than the one provided to you in the info session, you can also find the Intro to Coding Code Space Setup in Bookmarks. This is a more consolidated video. It's about 2 minutes and like 15 seconds long that shows you the installation process of code spaces. If I go too fast or you get stuck as I'm going through this demo. So GitHub, what is it? GitHub, in short, is what's known as a version control, right? Really, if you guys have ever used something like Dropbox or you have like, your iCloud, you can store files and pictures and videos in there, right? We can do something fairly similar to that here on GitHub, specifically folders and files of different types. And GitHub allows us to store this and collaborate with other developers, right? So let's say I was in a team and I was going to go create the new and better version of Facebook. Then, I would want to have somewhere to host all these files of my website where I can share them with other developers and we can all collaborate together, right? That's what GitHub is. We also use GitHub so I can distribute this curriculum to you guys a lot easier, right? And now the way that these folders and files are stored on GitHub is by what we call a repository, which really is just a fancy word for a folder, right? That's all it really is, right? So GitHub allows you to create repositories that hold other folders, right? It's just a folder of folders, right? So if you were to open up your documents on your computer or like videos or downloads, you have folders of folders. That's really what a repository is. It's just some kind of container that's going to hold all your information in one consolidated location without you losing it, right? And the reason we do that is what if, I have all my files on my computer and my computer breaks, right? Or I lose access or I delete it by accident, right? GitHub stores all this on their server. So you always have access to this information. You can share it with others. And then you can improve on it and keep different versions of this, right? For example, if I click down on this button here, I can see the different versions of this curriculum. And these versions are just different versions of the curriculum as it was being developed. As I make improvements or changes, I might make a copy of this curriculum, make improvements to it, and then merge it to my main folder to make the updates, right? So it allows us to build upon previous projects. To understand GitHub isn't really important, right? The reason why I'm giving you guys descriptions is to give you some context of what GitHub is and why we're using it, right? GitHub is going to allow me to share the curriculum with you guys. And another important thing it's going to allow me to do is going to allow you guys to run your code without having to install anything, right? If you've looked around a little bit on the internet about coding, you've probably heard of like Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, JetBeans, or all these crazy editors. Really, they all do pretty much the same thing with obviously some specific differences. Well, I'm not going to make you install any of that, right? There's no reason for that. I don't want to deal with having to go and have you guys all share your screen as I help you debug what went wrong with your installation process. So to ignore that step and ignore the headache, we consolidated our curriculum to one place, and we're just sticking to one program, which is going to be GitHub Codespaces. So GitHub Codespaces is going to be a virtual environment of some kind of code editor, right? That's going to be running on our browser. So you're not going to require to install anything. To access GitHub Codespaces, what you're going to do is you're going to navigate to the top left of your GitHub page, right? You're going to click the hamburger, really just 3 parallel lines, and it should open up this on the left side, this panel. And you're going to click on Codespaces, right? This is going to bring you to this page here, right? And here you can see the other types of Codespaces that you have, right? I have 2 open. I created this one today, earlier. And here is the one that I used during our info session last week. So when you want to access your different Codespaces, you can come here. You can also create different versions of Codespaces by using these templates. Just like Word has the option to create a blank Word document or already some pre-configured templates already on Word or like Excel, you could do something very similar to that here, right? But this is where you're going to come to see what Codespaces you already have or create some blank ones. Now, let's go ahead and navigate back to where the curriculum lived at, right? Everyone should have clicked that link. You should already be logged into your GitHub account, and you should be at this page here. Right, very simply, what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to the top right corner, and you're going to see 2 green buttons. You want to click on the one that says use this template, right? It's going to have a drop-down window, and you're going to click on open in a code space. And what this is going to do is going to set up a brand new code space for you, right? It's going to open up a new tab, and you're going to see here this screen. And for those of you who have used Visual Studio Code, right, it's going to look fairly similar, right? Codespaces pretty much creates a version of Visual Studio Code on your browser. And as it's creating this code space, it's going to use that repository of the curriculum as a template to set it up here, right? So you don't have to install VS Code. You don't have to download the curriculum, open it up there. Really, you can just use Codespaces to open it up. Now, there is a limit to Codespaces. There is a certain amount of hours that you can run Codespaces per month. Every 30 days, it does reset on the first of the month. But for those of you who are going to be coding a lot, you might want to use a different editor, or you might want to download Visual Studio Code and actually open it there. For those of you who might encounter that problem, we'll talk on the side and I can help you with that. But for most people here in this course, the allotted time that code spaces gives you for running code should be enough. Really, I've only seen two people exceed the runtime of using code spaces, and they exceeded it like 3 days, 3 or 4 days before it reset it, right? And these people were people that were either unemployed or stay-at-home moms or dads, and they had all day to code, and they just were coding all day, so they exceeded the time. Um, Obviously, because they're putting that extra work in. But for the most part, every single one of you guys should just be able to have GitHub code spaces and not have any issues. Now, if this is the first time you set up a GitHub code space, you're going to realize it's going to take a little bit of time, right? It's going to go through the entire installation process. You even see here in my terminal, it was setting up my GitHub code space. Give it its time. I have some settings pre-configured for your the curriculum that it has to install to make this process easier for y'all. But is everyone at this spot here? Does everyone have a GitHub code space of the curriculum? I see a bunch of head nods, even Tamika, awesome. So Visual Studio Code, what is it? So there's different forms of editors out there, right? Different forms of software. Visual Studio Code is an extension-based editor. Now, what does that mean? Well, some editors already come pre-configured with what they can do, right? They already have some built-in tools that are hard set into the editor themselves, right? VS Code doesn't, right? It's extension-based. So what that means is for whatever you want to do, you have to install an extension, right? If you remember the old days, when the internet first started up, everyone had like a bunch of like extension bars at the top of their browser. You just, for some reason, just somehow always installed a bunch of extensions, and then you had ads everywhere, slow down the family computer, right? It's something very similar to that, right? We have extensions that we can install. These extensions could be stuff like for running Python, for running C#. You might have extensions for configuring the how your VS Code looks like. We have some extensions that we needed to install, and the extensions were Python and Jupyter notebooks. So to find the extensions, you navigate to the toolbar on the far left, and you should find this icon that looks like a Tetris block. And when you hover over it, it says extensions, and you can click that. It's going to open up what extensions have already been installed, and it's going to allow you to search for some other ones, right? As you see here, we have specifically a bunch of versions of like Python stuff and Jupyter notebooks. So we need Python installed so our code spaces can run Python code. And we also need Jupyter notebooks installed because our curriculum is built off of Jupyter notebooks. Roger, what's Jupyter notebooks? Really not that important, but I use Jupyter notebooks to create this curriculum, right? Jupyter notebooks allowed me to create text and add code blocks within my text to allow it to run in the middle of the lectures, right? And we can see that here when I open up lesson 1. This is what our lessons look like. It's going to be the actual curriculum itself, right? I'm able to, write out this whole curriculum, and then at certain points, I'm able to add code blocks in here that we can run some examples, right? If I didn't use Jupyter notebooks, what I would have to do is switch between different tabs to run code as I'm teaching you guys. So Jupyter notebooks is just an extension that I use to better format and streamline the teaching process to you guys. Now, what I want you guys to do is after it's been set up, you're going to navigate to the lessons directory in this side panel, right? This can be all your folders. You're going to see a bunch of folders that you probably don't know what they are. The very first one is going to be dev container. I don't want you to touch this. This is not important to you guys. This dev container, it has the settings that CodeSpace is used to install it. So this might look very foreign to you guys. If it does, don't worry. It's supposed to. Even it was forwarded to me when I started working with code spaces. Uh, but you can kind of see here that I have a specific Python version installed here. So this dev container really, it's just holding the settings to set up your code space. So you don't need to touch this. So ignore dev container. You're gonna see 3 other folders. You're gonna see exercises. This is where you're gonna have the exercises for all the lessons. You can scroll down through all these. You can see some lessons are going to have more exercise than others. So there's plenty of work for you guys to do between classes, right? If you're brand new to coding, this is going to be very, very, or I'm sorry, if you're not brand new to coding, it's going to be very basic for you guys. So just be aware of that. But you have enough lessons here to get some work in. Additionally, the lessons themselves will have exercises at the bottom, and we'll talk about those in a bit too. But here is where you'll find all your exercises, your lesson exercises for each stage. So after each stage, you can come here and do those exercises. Graphics, you don't have to worry about these. We have some pictures in the curriculum, and to load them up, I had to make sure they were in here somehow. So this is where I'm storing all the graphics. You can ignore that folder. And then lessons, this is where we're going to have all the lessons for today. Now, every single one of you guys, for the most part, should have already read the pre-course, right? This was mentioned during the info session. This should have been sent to you guys in an email as well. I understand sometimes we have issues with emails. Maybe they get buried, or we had different emails registered. That's okay. But the pre-course really just gives you an introduction to our course of who we are, the different, our different staffs are going to play a role for you guys in the early months of you guys trying to get into Platoon. It's going to talk about GitHub code spaces, repos, some programming concepts. It talks to you about inputs and printing out on your console, and then it's going to have a very brief explanation of variables and different data types. Right. So if you guys haven't read it, make sure you guys do take the time to kind of just give it a read through. But today we're going to start with lesson 1. Now, before we run any actual code, we need to make sure that our Jupyter Notebook is actually properly installed. So Jupyter Notebooks was originally created for research development and data, right? So because of that, there's certain settings that we have to establish to ensure that we're actually able to run coding here, right? And what that setting is going to be to select a kernel, right? A kernel. Now, Roger, what's a kernel? Right? Such a fancy word. You think about popcorn kernels, right? A kernel, without getting very technical, is just another way of really an interpreter, right? The example I used was like if I was to go to Japan, right, and I try to communicate with someone that was native to Japan, someone that's Japanese, they would speak to me probably more than likely in their native tongue, right? I don't know Japanese, so I might need someone to interpret for me my English into Japanese so I can communicate with this native person, right? That's kind of what the kernel is. I need something to be able to convert the code that I'm typing in into something that is readable and understandable for my computer, right? So that kernel is that interpreter. It's going to take in my code. It's going to kind of, interpret it and convert it into a way that my computer can understand it, right? That's the best way of explaining what this kernel is doing. So we're going to select kernel, and it's going to open down a drop-down menu. And we're going to tell it what kernel we want for it to use. And now this is very important. It won't work if you guys don't select the proper one. You're going to click on Python environments, right? And it's going to give you a drop-down of 3 different Python versions. So by default, I think Codespaces has like 3.11. We don't want 3.11. We're looking for 3.13.3. Now you might have different versions of this. So it's very important that the 3.13.3 version of Python is the one that has user local bin Python written afterwards, right? Now that might look familiar. I showed you that inside of my dev container, right? When I set the settings for this code space, I added it in here that this is the version of Python we're using, which is why it's important that you select that specific one. So if you have an issue, if you get some kind of error when you're running your code that you don't have the proper kernel, I want you to look at the top right and you will see what kernel you have selected. More than likely, it's probably not correct, right? It might be a different version. If it does say Python 3.13, it might not be the proper one. So you might want to click it again, and then you can click on select another kernel, and it'll bring you back to that search bar. Right, so user local bin Python. Notice that saying recommended now, and there's a star to it because that's the one I have selected. But now it's able to identify that this is the proper kernel. Now we are 100% set up, right? Now, one thing that I want to mention, there is a time limit to how much you can have CodeSpace running. So whenever you're done working with CodeSpace for the day, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to navigate to your code spaces. And in here, you're going to go to your code space that you have. Notice they have very weird naming conventions. That's okay, right? It's GitHub is going to give it a default random generated name to your code space. So the one I just created is called Fuzzy Bassoon. You're going to navigate to the far right. You can see this is the one that's active. You're going to click down on the three dots here, and you're going to stop your code space. That way, it's not just running in the background if you're not using it. All right, just get comfortable on turning it off so you don't exceed your time.
Go through that again. How to turn it off?
You're going to navigate to the top left of your GitHub, and you're going to click on the three parallel lines here. And that's going to open up the search bar, or not search bar, really, it's just like a directory. You're going to click on code spaces. That's going to take you to the location of where all your code spaces are at. You're going to find your code space, and you're going to press on the three dots on the far right, and you should be able to see the stop code space selection. That's going to stop running your code space. We have a lot of people now. This is a lot more than we had starting off. Okay, cool. Now, before we get started, I want to make a disclaimer. This is an intro to coding course. And the reason why I'm making a disclaimer, because I did see when you guys were talking about what you guys are expecting to get out of this course, I saw a mention of data structures and algorithms, as well as CRUD and integrating AI. Love it. You will get to that eventually, not in this course though, right? So if you already have a solid foundation in Python, you might find this course to be a little too easy for y'all, right? So this is really to get a solid understanding of Python. Let's say you're learning Python on your own, you already have an understanding of some of these concepts, but maybe you want somebody else to tell you how these concepts work in a different way. This course is good for you, right? But really, if you already know Python or you know this stuff, you might find this course, to be too easy. So just be aware that the reason I'm making disclaimers is I don't want to waste y'all's time. For those of you that are here expecting something else, right? This is an intro to coding using Python, right? But we will talk about different stuff, right? We're going to talk about variables. We will talk about the different data structures like lists, dictionaries, how to manipulate them. Really, this intro to coding course should give you a solid understanding of Python for you to work on coding and hopefully apply to Platoon and be successful. All right. And you guys are in a very good spot. Dante might tell you here, but we used to get this course right before the deadline, right? And people were in a spot where once the course is done, they had a week left to apply, right? Or actually, I think they had like a weekend. They had like a weekend left to apply, and they found themselves in the spot like, hey, I went to this course, but I'm not prepared. I've yet to finish my application process, or they complete the application process, but they take the live technical assessment and then they weren't successful, right? The timing of this course has been changed to ensure that you guys have more than enough time to practice your skill between now and the deadline to ensure that you guys are as successful as possible before your course. So you guys are in a very good spot right now. And as I mentioned before, the topics we're going to cover, it's everything you need to know about Python. So for those of you who might already know a little bit of Python, you might know some other concepts. I've had it where I had a student kind of argue with me in class. If I encourage everyone, right? I want you guys to ensure that you contribute, you talk about your code, you share some code, you ask your questions. If you find a better solution, I might ask you to share it. But if you are presenting or telling me like you could do this in a much better way, and it's like some crazy code which works and it's good code, I might tell you that maybe that we should not be talking about that, or save it for a different time, because this is an intro course. So if you have a much better understanding of Python, just know that if it's out of the scope of the curriculum, I will tell you, and we can talk about it on the side, or like I can help you on one-on-ones or whatever, and I can definitely give you some more guidance in regards to your code. But hopefully keep it within the scope of the program, because we are from different levels, right? Some of you guys maybe just started coding. This is your first time looking at code. Some of you guys have months of coding. Some of you guys have been doing this and are coming back to it. So we are at different levels, and I want to make sure that everyone is in the same spot and no one's leaving this class more confused than they came in. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and start. Do I have any questions before I actually go over the curriculum? Is everyone set up? Are we all good to go? Any questions about code spaces or anything that we've covered so far?
Yes, question.
Yes.
So I was in here for the last session, but I noticed that my background is white and yours is black. Does that matter at all?
Not at all.
Okay.
I have it set to night mode because I don't like that white screen in my face, especially because I'm coding late at night. So it's just a theme, right? So don't worry about the color or anything crazy like that. It's not gonna have any impact on the code.
Thank you.
And if you guys have any questions, do stop me. I'd rather you guys interrupt me mid sentence and I answer your questions than for you to hold off the question and then I'm like two subjects ahead and now you're lost. So I don't think it's rude. Just stop me in my tracks, ask me the questions, and then I'll answer you guys. All right. So
I do have one question.
yes,
I had to
Jason.
restart. I had to restart my GitHub. But I am back to the same screen you're on. I have my workspace intro to coding live, and it says main the same way as yours. But I'm just at the step where I know it's supposed to be Python 3.13.3, and you said to go to the left side and find the hamburger. I think you said.
To set the kernel, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly that. Yes.
On the right side, this is what you want to click on right here.
Okay.
It shows you what kernel selected. It's going to open now this drop down menu at the top midsection of your browser. You can click on select another kernel. And then you should be able to choose Python environment. That's going to give you the different versions of Python that you have.
And
Right?
if I'm just not seeing on the right where it even says for you Python 3.13.3, is there something I need to do before that? Because I'm just not seeing that at all.
Are you in the same page I'm in?
Yes, yeah, just not the dark mode, but same page that you're in.
And you don't see select a kernel or anything like that?
No, not on the right side at all. No.
I can second that. I don't see it either.
But everything else is set up like the same way. Like it has my name at the bottom. It has workspace / intro to coding live, and main is red inside of parentheses with the same $ and square.
Okay. Let's try this. Okay. Tell you what, we're gonna take a break in about 10 minutes. So on that break, I'll work with you guys individually and get it set up. Sound good?
Thank you. Yes, sir.
We're
Thank
not
you.
we're not running any code right now, so it's okay.
Okay.
It really just we'll all be just sitting here listening, but I'll work with you guys individually.
Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. So let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit so you guys can see my code. I don't need my terminal open. Another thing that I want to mention, right? As we're going through this, you might not like running your code and these code blocks. So what I encourage you guys to do, if you want to write some raw Python code, right? You are able to add to this. You can create other folders, you can create other files, you can do a lot of stuff in VS Code. What you're going to do is you're going to navigate to the left side panel here. You're going to click on this panel. It's going to highlight it. And then you're going to right click. And you might get that pop down message. You can just block it. And you can create a new file. Or what you can also just do is click on the new file button on the top, and that'll create a new file, right? This is helpful, especially if you are working on other exercises besides our program. You want to run some code, right? You're working on exercises from anywhere, or you want to just practice coding. You might want to create a Python file to run this code. So what you can do is you can create a new file. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call it practice. And then to make it a Python file, you're going to end it with a .py, right? That's going to tell your code space that this is a Python file, right? That .py is the extension for your file type. You might see like other files like, .pngs, .jpeg, .txt, the different types of files out there. This is specifically a Python file. And then once you create it, you can open up a blank Python document, and you can do something like add Python code. And then when you're ready to run it, you can just press the big play button on the right side right here that says run Python file. And then you'll see it'll show it here in your terminal. So if you don't like working along on the assignments on the lesson, or you're working with Python code somewhere else and you just need somewhere to write code, I encourage you, use this too. All right, so Python. The first thing that we want to talk about Python is going to be the syntax, right? And syntax is just a very fancy word for grammar, right? Programming languages, Python, JavaScript, all these are, as the name implies, just a language, right? The same way that you guys communicate, right? You know English. By the way, English is my second language. So if I don't pronounce something correctly or you don't understand me, let me know and I will slow down. I say it again, right? So sometimes I slur over my words too. So don't hesitate to make me repeat myself. I will. But the same way that you learn new languages like English or Spanish or whatever language you might know, right? You have to learn the grammar rules for that language, right? Punctuation, the structure of what comes first in a sentence, the different parts of the sentence, what verbs are, what nouns are, all this, the grammar, that's what syntax is for programming languages, right? We have a lot of linguists that come through our programming languages. I'm sorry, not our programming languages, our programs, and are very successful, right? Because their job learning a new language and speaking these languages, it transfers over to learning Python and JavaScript, because really that's what programming languages are. They're just another way to communicate, right? But instead of communicating with each other like you and I, we're communicating with the computer, right? So just the same way that regular languages have grammar, we have syntax, right? That's what syntax means, right? The grammar or the structure that defines the language itself, right? So we're going to talk about the syntax. Now, why is syntax important? Well, for one, it's going to increase your readability, right? If we didn't have syntax or grammar, when writing our Python code, it could look very messy, right? It could be very difficult to interpret what our code is trying to say or how it should be run. So syntax is important for readability and also to prevent runtime errors, right? So what does that mean? Well, when you go and press the play button or the run button on your code space and you're trying to run your code, it's going to run your code from top to bottom, line by line, right? And if you had errors or mistakes on your code, that's the syntax is what allows it to identify those issues when you run your code. Who here knows another language like Java, C#? Okay, awesome. So there's other languages that are a lot more deliberate with their syntax. Python isn't, right? It's a dynamic language, whereas other languages, they're going to make you write out what type of variables you're creating. Like if you're creating an integer, you have to specifically specify behind the name of your variable, hey, this is an integer, this is a string, right? This is a list. For everything you do, you have to be very specific about what it's supposed to be. You pretty much put labels on everything. Python doesn't do that. Python interprets what you mean. It dynamically interprets what your code is trying to do, right? So the syntax is very important for that, right? The syntax allows it and gives it the ability to properly interpret what you're trying to say in its language, right? Which is why it's called the interpreter, right? The interpreter is what runs your Python code. Now, in Python, you're going to use indentation for how you structure your code. For those of you who are coming from the JavaScript Intro to Coding course self-paced, you might be familiar with using curly brackets for starting your code blocks, right? And structuring your code. We don't do that in Python, right? The biggest thing that we use for structuring our code, where code starts and where it ends, is going to be where we indent it in. So we'll talk about indentation. Other languages use curly brackets. Like I mentioned, JavaScript, we don't do that here. When it comes to indenting, right, pressing the tab keyboard on your keyboard works just as fine. Don't use your space bar. The tab button will automatically indent it to the right 4 spaces, right? If you start using your space bar, you're gonna have indentations that are off, and you're gonna have an error. I believe it's like an indentation error when you run your code, and it's not gonna run right. So make sure that you're using the tab button on your keyboard to indent your code to the right. Thomas asked a question. By the way, when you guys ask a question, I will voice it out loud so people know what I'm answering. Is there a way to override the interpretation? Say A is equal to 10, but you want to read it as a string instead of an integer. Yes, absolutely. That's called typecasting, and we will be talking about that, I believe, today. So there is a way to convert strings to integers. So I'll get to it in a little bit, Thomas, but yes, there is a way. Good question. So here's your first example of code, right? We have 2 little code snippets. There's going to be a correct method and a wrong method. Now, don't focus on the actual code itself, right? What I want you to focus is the structure of this, right? When we write our code and we want to start a code block, what we do is we use a colon to let our Python code know, hey, I'm about to start a new code block below this, right? So we use the colon here to specify that. Whereas if you know JavaScript, you might use the curly braces to specify that. We don't do that here. We use the colon. Now, after the colon, whatever your code block is going to be indented to the right. So when I run this, it's going to say if true, which by default, this will work. It's going to print out everything within this code block. And as we do this, you see here that it successfully does that. The incorrect code snippet here, you see that the top one, it has the proper indentation, but the bottom one does not, right? So if you try to run this, you're going to get, and I was correct, you get an indentation error. So unindent does not match any outer indentation level, right? So make sure that your indentation in your code is the same, right? Just press the tab to move to your right to ensure that everything is like the same. Now, before we start or continue, we're going to go ahead and go on a 10-minute break. So our class runs from 6 to 9, and we take 10-minute breaks every hour on the hour. So we were here a little bit early, so we'll start a little bit early today. Time is 6:54. Let's go ahead and come back at 7:04, and we're going to continue from where we left off. So before we went on break, we talked about Python syntax very briefly. We talked about what syntax is, the fact that you require indentation for your code, and the colon to start a code block, right? And we'll talk more about code blocks and when you're going to want to create a code block. So don't worry too much about that right now. We talked about what the correct formatting looks like and what bad formatting looks like. Now, I understand not everybody here has read the pre-course, right? The pre-course covers inputs and outputs in Python. So very briefly, output, right? Output is what we are displaying on our screen or what comes out of some kind of function, right? A way for us to show output on our computer is by the means of a print statement, right? For those of you who have used JavaScript, you're probably familiar with console.log. That's weird, right? Very weird name. Python is a little bit much friendlier. It uses the keyword print, which quite literally is just printing this text, right, on your screen. Printing is very helpful because it allows to see what our code is doing, right? What our values are, whether they are strings, integers, what's actually saved inside of what. So print is going to be something that you're going to be doing very often, right? And this is what it's doing here, right? We see here that they call the print method, right? They quite literally type in the word print and they open up these parentheses, right? And you're going to see here as we progress through Python that there's going to be a lot of things that we call as methods. They're really just like a function, right? It's doing something, right? Print does something. Print displays to your screen, right? And usually these methods, they have parentheses that take in content, right? They might take strings, they might take numbers, right? They might take decimals, they might take Boolean values, and if these data types sound confusing, that's okay because we haven't covered them. If you haven't read through the pre-course, it might sound a little confusing. Just know that they take in information, right? And then they do stuff with that information. This print statement specifically takes in information and then shows it to you on your screen, right? That's what the print statement is doing. It is outputting this information to you, right? So this print statement is going to display this is indented correctly, right? This sentence that says this is indented correctly, right? This is a string, right? Strings are usually text or characters, right? Characters of text, right? They could be either alphabet letters, numbers. They could be special characters like quotation marks, exclamation marks, whatever, right? Strings are really just text, right? So to be able to write text, we use the quotation marks, and we see that here, right? We start quotation marks and then we end quotation marks. This specifies where the start and the end of this string is at, right? And this string only says this is indented correctly, right? So when we print this out, as I mentioned to you, it's going to output that string and show it to us as output. And then it does the same thing for the next line, right? It prints out this is still part of the same code block, right? So this is what that output is. Do I have any questions about the print statement or output? Does Python also allow for the use of apostrophes to make strings like JavaScript? I'm assuming you're referring to string interpolation. Is that correct, David? By the way, you guys can come off your mic at any time and ask these questions if it's faster. So, don't hesitate to just stop, come off the mic. But if you're referring, David, to using string interpolations, absolutely, you can. We will get to that. But there's a specific way that Python does it. It's a little bit similar, but yes, there is a way of doing that. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, sorry, I had my kid walk in here, so that's why I had myself muted still. But yeah, basically like console log in JavaScript and then followed by the string within the parentheses, right where the quote, I mean, you probably know this, right where the quotation marks are, you could also use an apostrophe. So I
Yeah,
was wondering if that was the same in
Oh,
Python.
okay. Yes, you definitely can, right? So this will definitely work. I like to stay with the double quotation marks, right? Because typically text will have apostrophes. So let's say if I have if I said David's as ownership, this will work, right? Because I can show ownership in this string. Now, this won't work if I use apostrophes to show my string. Notice here, I want you to notice the coloring of this text, right? This is blue, and this is white, right? This is right here. This is my string, but this apostrophe is showing that this is the end and this is the start. And then there's just a random S here, and then there's another apostrophe. So if you want to use apostrophes in your string to show stuff like ownership or possession, or stuff like that, you want to ensure that the way that you create your string is by using the double quotation marks. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, no, that's definitely way simpler and makes more sense than JavaScript because yeah, rather than having to use backslashes for ownership and whatnot, much rather just use quotations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I also have a question regarding the quotation. So what happens if you have a string and you need to actually put the double quotations within the string? How would you actually like present that?
We usually use backward slashes, right? This is known as escape characters, right? So typically, there's going to be certain special characters in code that Python might use to refer to different things. Like, for example, we're using, like you mentioned, we're using the double quotation marks to specify that this is a string. But what if you want to specifically type out a quotation mark, but you already use quotation marks? Well, you escape that sequence with a backward slash, just like David mentioned. So yes, you could do that. Does that make sense, Monica?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's say that all this output is bothering you. If you want to clear out all this extra stuff, you can click on clear all outputs, and then it'll clear everything out. Just a heads up. I'll be careful with this because sometimes what happens is some code blocks are going to be dependent on other code blocks that happen before them, and you'll see what I mean in a little bit. So don't always clear outputs if you have variables established. It'll make a little bit more sense down the line, but you'll see what I mean. So we talked about indentation. The next thing is going to be comments, right? So most languages, I'm pretty sure every language, allows you to do something called comments, right? Comments are inline text in your code files that essentially document certain things, right? Comments are very useful when you want to describe what your code is doing, right? Most of the times you're going to be working in teams with other developers. And it's very important as you're creating code, right? And someone comes to use what you have created, they're able to understand what this code does. Additionally, code usually lasts for a long time, right? Probably for years. You might be working on some code for a couple years, then you leave, right? Someone else ends up doing your job. 5 years later, they might have to use the same code that you created. And now they're having to learn what you have created and understand the code in the code base. And there's no comment or documentation for the code. It can be very difficult for a new developer to understand what the code is doing. So it's very important that we are able to document what code does. And we do that via comments. Now, how does our Python files know how to differentiate between what actual code is and what comments are? Well, we do that by the hashtag. Now, different languages use different methods of doing this. Python specifically uses the hashtag character. And we see that here on our first example. We have the single line comments, right? We have the code of print hello world, but we have some text to the right of it and above it, but it's grayed out, right? And the reason it's grayed out is because it's prefixed by that hashtag, right? This tells your Python file that this is not actual code. This is a comment, and you should not read this. So when I run this, I don't get any issues. We see here that I'm able to print out hello world with no issues at all. But I still have other text in here that it is ignoring. Now, if I remove this comment here, notice I start getting a bunch of red lines, right? Usually this indicates that there's an error in your code, right? It doesn't know what to do with this. It's going to interpret it as code. And as you can kind of already figure out, this isn't any actual code. So when I run this, it doesn't know what to do with it, right? So it gives me an error, right? It's trying to think that I'm trying to write some code in here. So it's giving me an indentation error because I indented right. But even if I indented properly, it's still going to give me an error, right? So it's very important that if you're writing comments that you prefix it with that hashtag, right? And now we see that the squiggly lines are no longer there. and it goes back to working like normal. Now, what did Java have to say? Well, it can get a little redundant to have to add multiple hashtags for every single line of comments that you're adding, right? So we're also able to do multi-line comments, right? And the way that we do that is by using 3 double quotation marks, right? So you want to open up multi-line comments with 3 double quotation marks at the start and at the end of where your comment goes. This is more comments. Here is another line. And notice I can keep adding stuff in here and I don't get an error. It's going to interpret everything between these two triple double quotation marks as comments, right? So if you want to add multiple lines of comments, then you can use the triple quotation marks. Now, I do want to give some word of caution. You don't want to add a bunch of lines of comments, right? You shouldn't have a whole essay about what something is doing, right? As you're writing code, you want to keep it brief, right? And straight to the point, right? Get your point across enough that it tells the developer what your code is doing, but it's not overwhelming the rest of your code and it just makes it difficult to read, right? So as you start thinking about what good code looks like and what good comments look like, you want to keep it straight and concise, right, and to the point. Do I have any questions about comments? Awesome. Pretty straightforward. Here I can run this. Notice I have no issues. Good to go. Now, I encourage you guys, try these methods out. The code blocks are there for a reason. If you want to add stuff to it and just mess around with it, other than do that as we're talking, definitely try it out. This is one of the reasons why I encourage you guys to ensure that you're behind your computers. A lot of times I'll see people, during these lectures, they're driving or they're in some restaurant just watching these videos.
Anybody else just
You
listening?
froze,
Oh, there
Roger.
we go.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, there you're back.
Thank you. Sorry for that. I got potato Wi-Fi. I must have left my window open or something. But so essentially, what I was trying to get at is what I said before I got cut off. You want to ensure that you're behind your computer as you guys are hearing these lessons. I've seen people behind their steering wheel, they're driving, listening to these lectures, they're out in public, walking around. I highly encourage you guys are behind your computers as you guys are during these live lectures, so you can run this code, try it out in real time, right? You're not going to learn much if you're just kind of hearing me as you're driving, and chances are you're probably not going to watch the full recording the next day, right? These recordings are typically 3 hours long. If you miss a day, which is fine, it might become a little overwhelming when these lessons start piling up and they're 3 hours long, right? Imagine having to show up the next day. You're watching 3 hours of the previous day, and now you're sitting in on another 3 hours of more lecture. So highly encourage that when you are hearing these lectures, you sit behind your computer and you try these things out in real time. Variables. What are variables? So variables are a way to store information, right? The best way I like to explain what a variable is by thinking of a box, right? If I wanted to save my name somewhere, I would save it into a variable. And the way that variables work is they're kind of like a container, right? Here we see a nice little picture that I made for you guys. I don't know if it's really opened up or not. But a variable really is just a form of a box that's going to hold some kind of value, right? It can hold a lot of types of values, right? It can hold strings, it can hold numbers, right? It can hold different types of data types. And the reason for this is so we can save it somewhere and then access it later. The way that variables work is that you want to give this variable a name that you can call upon so it knows how to grab the information. That name is linked to a memory address. Now, you don't really have to know how all this stuff works, but the best way to understand it is when your code is ran, right, and it gets to a variable or you try to use a variable, it needs to find that information somewhere in your computer, right? So when you create a variable, what it's going to do is going to automatically, by default, assign it a memory address, right? think of your storage as a bunch of boxes in your computer, right? There's boxes, some boxes are filled with information from stuff that you might have. You might have pictures, Word documents, right? You might have text documents all over your computer. And all this information is stored somewhere in your computer in a bunch of little containers, little boxes, somewhere in memory, right? That's kind of what's happening here, right? When you define a variable, what's going to happen is you're going to give this variable a name, and this name is going to be linked to somewhere in your computer, right? That memory address is typically a long string of numbers, right? That's not going to mean anything to you, and you don't have to mess around with it. But the reason that it's important to know is I'm going to show you how these variables are different, right? So the way that this works is when you create a variable and you're trying to use it, you're going to call the name of that variable. Your computer is going to see this name. Like, okay, this variable is called my name, and it has a memory address, right? Kind of like when you guys get mail, right? When you get a package at your front door, uh, there's a memory or there's an address to represent where that should be going at, right? Same concept here for variables. There's a link to where it should be going to, right? So we know how to access it, right? So let's give it a try. Here we have 4 different variables. We have age, name, price, and is valid. Now, all 4 of these are different types of data types, right? We have integers, which if you read through the pre-course, it's just a fancy way of saying number, right? So we have the integer type, right? This is an integer data type, right? It could be 27, it could be a million, it could be whatever you want it to be, right? But this typically refers to your whole numbers, right? We are creating a variable called age, right? We quite literally just type in the name of our variable, and we use the equal sign to assign it something, right? So we're saying age is going to equal to 27. So when I run this code, it's going to grab this number, it's going to save it to a box that's called age, right? This box is going to get some kind of memory address assigned to it in memory. So when we go ahead and call for the variable called age, it's going to know where to find the value that's assigned to it. The next variable we have is name, which is going to store a string called John, right? Well, as I mentioned to you guys before, a string is just text. The next variable is our decimal types, which in Python and most programming languages, and really in math, I think, it's called float, right? It's a floating decimal point value, right? That's where the name comes from, right? So anything that's going to have a decimal is going to be called float. This float is being assigned to a variable called price. And the next one here is what we call a Boolean, right? Boolean is going to be either one of 2 things, true or false, one or the other, right? So these are 4 different variable types or data types you're going to work with. But all 4 of these data types are being saved to a variable with their own unique name, right? Now, when you guys create variables, it's very important that you actually give it some kind of naming convention that matches what it's supposed to have, right? If I'm going to create an age variable that's going to store the age of somebody, it should probably be called age and shouldn't be called, recipe of spaghetti, right? It doesn't make sense. So when you guys are creating your variables, make sure you give it a something that's related to what it's actually supposed to be having, so it's easier for you to remember and use it throughout your code, right? Which is why you see here the age variable has 27. The name of John is holding a string. Price, typically, those are decimal types, right? So 29.99. And is valid is just a variable that's holding true or false. And that might seem a little confusing right now, but we'll get to that later. But we're going to go ahead and try to print out these variables. And you see here that we have an ID here. I'm going to go ahead and remove this piece of code real quick. I'm just going to go print the variables very briefly so you can see how this works. So name and price, right, is John and price. They have their values. I can print out a variable, right? So when I print a variable, it's going to read, okay, hey, he's trying to print out this variable called name. Well, let me go ahead and grab this name variable, and I'm going to look up its memory address. So it's going to go to your storage, It's going to find wherever the value of name is located at with that memory address. It's going to grab the value, bring it out, and display it for you, right? That's exactly what's happening here when I try to print out the variable of name or price. And when I run this, I see here that it displays to me the values that were assigned to this variable, right? So we see John and we see 29.99. Now, if you want to see what these memory addresses look like, what we're going to do is we're going to
I have a
wrap.
quick question for you.
Sure, go ahead, Jason.
Just trying to work at the same time that you're working. On my screen, I left when I removed the ID on both lines. Name and price still had two sets of parentheses on them, and I still went ahead and ran the line that gave me the same answer. Is that something that will happen all the time, or would it be better just to let it be one set of parentheses as opposed to two pairs of parentheses?
You want to remove those.
Okay, gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, it'll still work, but it's better read it this way.
Yeah, like cleaner overall, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Yes.
I see a question here. Sorry, if you guys ask a question in the chat, please, if I don't answer it, interrupt me. I see Thomas, you asked, is the open and close required for that string variable? Which one are you referring to, Thomas?
I think he's saying like, if you look at the string, and correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, like the actual, so for instance, you know how when you hit print name, um, and it doesn't print out the quotations, I think you might be asking, are the quotations needed for it to print the way you on that string? I think it's something like that.
Yes. The quotation marks specify to your Python code that this is supposed to be a string, right? So you need the quotation marks. Integers don't require strings, right? So the way this works, Python uses what's called dynamic typing, right? So I mentioned it briefly earlier. Other languages are going to require you to specify what the variable type is, right? Python doesn't do that. It's going to interpret what you intend it for it to be, right? And let me give you an example. Now I'm gonna get a bunch of errors as I type this out because it's not. I'm using a Python interpreter, so it's gonna think it's wrong because it is wrong. But other languages will make you do something like string name is equal to new string. Actually, no, it's gonna be John, not new string. But it's gonna specify. You have to specify what type of string it's supposed to be. If it's gonna be an age, it would be I think it's like integer age is equal to 27, right? Other coding languages is going to force you to specify what the value is when you save it in there. Python doesn't do that. Python is going to interpret what you need by default, right? Python's a little bit smarter than some of these other languages, I believe. So because of that, it needs a little bit of help, and that enough help that it needs is going to be the quotation marks, right? So Python's going to interpret what you mean, but if I type in John without the quotation marks, it's going to give me an error because it doesn't know how to read that. It might think that this is a variable, right? Because notice that the variable names, they don't have quotation marks. So how does Python know how to differentiate from a variable and a string? The quotation marks, right? Variables don't have quotation marks. So if it doesn't have a quotation mark, it's going to think that it is a variable. Notice here, name John is not defined. It thinks it's a variable. So it's trying to read what is assigned to John, but there's nothing assigned to it. It's supposed to be a string, right? So if it doesn't have quotation marks, it's going to by default think it's a variable, but it's supposed to be a string. Does that make sense, Thomas? Awesome.
Is it same, I guess, worth noting that like when you also type print, the quotation marks apply the same way? Like if you were to sandwich name with quotation marks next to the print, it would just print it as a string of name,
Yes,
not the actual variable itself.
absolutely. right? It uses those quotation marks to know what's a variable and what's supposed to be a string. Good question, David. Awesome. So now I was mentioning memory location. So right now we're printing out the variables. I mentioned that variables have a memory location. There is a way to see where this memory address is, right? The way to do that is by using the ID method, right? This is how it's typed out. It's ID with open and close parentheses. The same way that the print statement is working, we call the print method and we pass in what we want to print. ID is also a method, but what it does is different than print. So when I pass in name inside of here, it's going to find the address of name and it's going to give it to me. But I have to print it out to show it, right? So I have to wrap whatever returns back from this with a print statement, which is how it was originally typed out for you here, but I made you guys delete it, right? So when this runs, it's going to say, okay, you want to print something, but what are you printing out? Okay, you're printing out what comes back after calling ID. So what I'm doing here is I'm chaining two different methods back to back, right? What this is going to allow me to do is print out whatever is the memory address of a name. And as we see here, it's a long list of integers, right? This is the memory address in my computer of where it is saved. Now, this means nothing to you. The only reason I'm showing you this is so you can see that there is somewhere in memory that this is being stored at. I can do the same thing for price. I can say ID and then wrap everything around the quotation marks. And notice that price has something fairly similar to name, but it changes right about here. Right, so somewhere in memory, the price is being saved. Right, they have their own locations.
I know you said it doesn't matter to us now, but do those matter or mean anything to us later on?
It's gonna matter for me to show you immutability in a little bit. That term doesn't mean anything to you guys in a little bit, but it will matter for an example that I'm gonna show you later. Besides that, no, nothing else. You guys don't need ID method for anything else. All right. So do I have any questions before I move forward?
So later on, you'll show us how to actually print, we could say the whole story, right? Like John at 27 years of age bought something for $29.99. Okay.
Sure, I can definitely do that. Yeah, it's going to be string interpolation, but we will cover that, I believe, today. All right. So rules for naming variables. All right, these are some basic rules.
I guess
So
I do have one quick question about what you just showed us.
Yes.
With ID on the last line where it's ID and price, I see that there's a difference, say, if I run that code with it being not indented, where it is completely lined up. I actually ran the code with it being indented and gave me a different number. Is there like any reason that would happen, or would that just be incorrect?
Without being indented, what do you mean?
Yeah. So like you see how your print ID name and your print ID price are completely all in line. Where I have print ID where you're at, I had a space after print and I ran it and it just came with like a different number. So I just wanted to, I guess, like inquire about that. Mostly print was still where it was written, but there was a space in between print and the first parenthesis for ID.
No. Are you talking like this?
No. So the line below you, go down one, and I just space in between print and that first indentation right there. Yeah. And I ran that and it still worked, but it gave me a different number. Yeah, as opposed to like when it wasn't indented, it was a different number. I don't know if that's like a different location or
no. So that's a good question. So every time I run this, it's running the code again from start to finish. Okay. It resets this.
Okay.
Right? So it's not gonna always save it to the same spot. Sometimes it might,
Gotcha.
right? But it's not consistent. So every time I run this, it's going to find the nearest spot in memory to
Oh,
save it
okay.
at
Cool.
that moment.
Understood. Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so naming variables. So first and foremost, the naming convention is you want to begin with a letter or an underscore. It's going to be very rare you're going to use underscores. That'll be covered more in other courses later on, of when you would use an underscore. But really, the only thing you have to care about right now is you want to start off with a letter for your variable naming conventions. You cannot contain spaces or special characters. So you're asking yourself, well, what if I have different words, Roger? Like, how do I add different words? Well, uh, typically when a variable has different words in its name, we like to separate it with underscores, right? To specify there's two different words here. Now, if you've used JavaScript before, you might be familiar with something like this, where you have the second word with a capital letter and you're not using underscores, right? That's because the naming convention for Python and JavaScript are different. When you're coding in Python, typically the naming convention is underscores, and that is called snake case, right? So in Python, we use what we call snake case, and JavaScript, we call what's called camel case, right? Camel case because it's supposed to represent like the humpbacks of a camel, right? Up and down. The capitalization of the words. So when creating variables with different names in JavaScript or different words in it, you separate the words with the capitalization. But in Python, we use snake case. Now, Roger, am I going to get an error if I don't use this naming convention? No, right? So naming convention is really, it's just a standard operating procedure that we use, right? Typically you want to use what your company works with, right? So when you guys go to different organizations, they might have different ways of how they write code, right? Different procedures that they like to follow. So everyone's on the same standard. There's no right or wrong answer typically. I'm giving you what is generally done in Python, but don't be surprised if you see some Python code and it's written in camel case, right? Neither are wrong, but typically you want to use snake case for Python. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat those words again? You said snake case?
Yeah, snake
Uh,
case or camel case.
gotcha. Camel, okay.
Yeah, like the
And
animal camel with the humpbacks.
gotcha. Okay, so snake is for Python and camel is for Java, or is it vice versa?
Uh, yeah, snake case for Python. Hence, the word snake,
Python.
Python.
Okay,
Yeah.
makes sense. Thank you.
But they both mean the same thing, right?
No, they're two different things. It's just a standard of how to write your variable names. They're two different things. They're the same subject, but two different ways of doing things. Right? It's like
So why
writing
would they
in.
look the same?
No, they look different. Right?
Oh,
Right. We have the underscores to separate the words for snake
oh,
case, but
got it.
in camel case, we don't have any underscores. We separate the words using um the capitalization. Right? It's just like writing in cursive or writing not in cursive, right? They're both a way to write, but there's two different writing conventions, right?
That makes sense.
Same, but different.
Yeah.
But still same. All right. Okay. The next thing here that to really notice is that naming variables is case sensitive, right? So my name with a capital N is not the same with everything being lowercase, right? If you create a variable, for example, if I say name is equal to John, and then I try to print out name, I try to call the name variable, but I put a capital N, it's not going to know what that is. So variables are case sensitive. So make sure that you understand that when you're calling a variable, it's going to take the way that you wrote it literally. So you need to ensure that your capitalization is correct. When writing variable names, you want to avoid Python keywords, right? So you don't want to use some of these. For example, you don't want to call a variable print, right? Because print is a built-in method in Python, right? That is a reserved keyword for a built-in method, right? So any of the keywords that we talk about that do different things in Python, don't use that to name your variables. Here we have in Python, we tend to use it's a snack, but it's supposed to be snake case as a naming convention, right? But I just covered that. Another naming convention that you're going to hear is going to be the word constants, right? And constants is a something that doesn't change, right? As the name implies. Well, what doesn't change? Well, for example, stuff like pi, right? 3.14 or whatever the first couple of digits are, those never change. Gravity, there's a certain number for a gravity. Um, if you are creating a game and you have like a max retry for how many times it can play the game, or how many lives it has and it's hard set, that might be a constant, right? So when you want to create a constant that should not be changed later on, you want to identify that with capitalized, like everything, right? Everything should be capitalized. This is going to tell the developer or whoever's working with the code that this variable should never be changed. It should stay the same throughout the entirety of the code. Unlike age, right? Age is not a constant. Every year, your age changes. So age shouldn't be in all capital letters because the chances of you changing your age on your profile or something like that is probable.
And then just a kind of question that I never um when we do the capitalization of the variable, that doesn't automatically make it like an immutable um variable, right? It's just a rule of thumb that we need to follow
Right.
to catch people's attention. Okay.
That's correct. In other languages, you're able to keep people from overriding stuff. Python doesn't have that, right? So Python, we set a naming convention that we adhere to ensure that we're all on the same standard, right? It's more of like a community-wide thing that this is how we do things.
So just to kind of clarify on that, so basically it's just you communicating to whoever else is reading this code that, hey, don't change this variable. It's not actually like you could still reassign an all capital constant variable.
Yes, technically you could if you wanted to, but we use the naming conventions to let other people know that you shouldn't, right? Awesome. So Python data types and what are they, right? We've seen a little bit of them earlier, but let's actually talk a little bit about them. The first one we see here on this chart is going to be the Boolean data type, right? Which, as I mentioned earlier, there's only two versions of a Boolean, which is going to be true or not true, right? A prime example would be I think there's an example down here. Here's an example. I was going to show it to you guys in a bit. But Booleans is, for example, we have here, and I know the code might look a little confusing because we haven't talked about if-else statements in a bit. But here we have a variable called current temperature, and they're assigning the value to 67, right? And then we have a check here that's saying if current temperature is less than 68. As I mentioned, these might seem a little confusing if you've never seen this. That's okay. Just understand that we're checking if the current temperature, which is 67, is less than the number 68. If this is true, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the heater on is equal to true. But if it's not true, right? If this is not true, we go to the else statement and it's going to set the heater on to false, right? So ignore the whole if else stuff, and that might be a little confusing. Just understand that we are able to create variables to set certain conditions, whether something is true or not. And then with these variables, we were able to do different things. If the heater is on, then we might want to turn it off later, right? So we can use the variables to check the state of something before we do something else, right? If the heater's on, but we don't want to turn it off, then I can write some code to turn off the heater. If it's off, but I want to turn it on, I would check this Boolean. And then if it's off, I want to turn it on, I would turn it on, right? So we could use Booleans to set certain state conditions to see if something is true or not, right? So this is just an example of how that would work. The next one's going to be integers, right? As I mentioned to you guys, it's going to be your whole numbers, right? You'll also see here on the right side the display of how it's going to look like on your code. If you try to print out the type of something, this is what you're going to get in response, right? Integers, it's going to be the whole word for int, right? Int is just short for integers. That's going to be your whole numbers, like you saw before, like age, stuff like that. Next will be your decimal numbers. As I mentioned before, going to be your floats, your floating point decimals, your floating decimal point values, right? How it's going to be displayed when you try to print the type of something is going to be with the keyword float. Sequences of characters, right? This is your text, right? That's called a string. And that's shown here as str, right? Stir, short for string. And then we have another data type, which just represents an absence of value, right? And that's going to be the none type, right? When something is a none type, that means it doesn't have any kind of data type. There's nothing there, right? It's an absence of value, right? And that's typically displayed like this, none type, with capitalized words. Now, if you want to see what the type is of a variable, you can use this type method, right? We see that here, type open and close parentheses. Let me use the examples above, right? We saw the name here. I can print out name and I can print out price. If I want to see what type of data type this is, I can wrap the name around the keyword type with parentheses, just like I did the ID. And when I run this, you see here, I get class str, which stands for string, right? This is what I meant as the display. This is what's going to display to you of what something is. We can do the same thing for price. We can say type, wrap it around parentheses, and this is going to return to me float, right? So that's the display version, right? So this matches what I showed you here on this chart. The type is going to return to you what form of data type a variable might be, right? And that's very helpful when working with your code. You might want to see what type of something is before you start working with it, right? If let's say you expect some kind of data, right? You don't want to automatically start multiplying with a variable if you don't know if that variable is even a number or not, right? What if that variable is a string? You might want to check if it's an integer before you actually start doing the multiplication. Because if you don't check the type, what's probably going to happen, your code is going to automatically attempt to multiply strings and it won't work, right? Something like that, right? All right. So different data objects are given specific data types. The computers know how to store them in memory. So here we see one, right? Notice there's no quotation marks here. This is an integer, right? Because it's just a number with no quotation marks. This is an integer. This is probably going to be a string. We would think to yourself, well, Roger, that's a number, right? That should be an integer. Correct. It should be an integer. But because you wrapped it around single quotation marks, it's going to convert this into a text format. It's going to think it is a text of 3, right? And when you try to add this, notice that I get an error. It says unsupported operand type for plus, right? It's saying that it does not support the addition of integer and string, right? So this error here, although it looks a little cryptic, really what it's saying is, hey, I don't support this functionality. I cannot add a string and an integer. Although I know the 3 is supposed to be a number, the type of value that it is in my computer is going to be a string type, and it can't add them together. So I get an error. So it's important that you understand what data type your values are.
Question, just to like clarify.
Yes.
I'm guessing basically what that's saying is like the computer cannot add an integer to, a whole number to a sequence of characters. Is basically what it's saying when it says unsupported, right?
Yes, use the keyword integer from here on out to get used
Gotcha.
to it. But yes,
Okay.
it cannot add an integer to a string. You're correct.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, no, I mean you're not wrong. It is a whole number, but just so we can get on the habit of calling it integer.
Gotcha.
All right, so how do we do that, Roger? How do we add a number that's supposed to be a number but it's a string? Well, you want to do what we call typecasting, right? And this is a question that was asked earlier. Can we convert variables to different data types? Absolutely, right? The way that you typecast something, just like we use the method print, we use the method ID or type. There's another method called int, right? It's a wrapper is another way of calling it. We're gonna wrap this string of 3 with the int wrapper, right? It's going to cast this from a string to an integer, and it's going to add this to the 1, right? And now it's going to successfully add these numbers together, right? So if you do want to start adding variables together or values together that are of different types, you could use typecasting to get them on the same baseline and then do what you got to do. We talked about taking the type of something. Here is a variable with a decimal. Notice that gives me a float. Now, here we have the 3 again, right? It is a whole number, right? And I want to add it to the 1. But instead of converting it to an integer, we use typecasting with the float wrapper instead. And when it adds the 3 and the 1, it's going to give me a 4.0. That's because I converted this whole number or this integer into a float, and it's going to give me a decimal or a float in return. But why is it giving me a decimal, right? Why doesn't it just give me a whole number? Well, because what if this was an uneven value, right? What if I try to convert them to a float, like 3.2, right? It's a string right now, but if I convert it to a float and add it to a 1, right, it's going to give me 4.2. So it by default is going to return to you a float. In the event that there is that extra decimal point, it's already taking care of it, right? So by default, if you add an integer in a float, it's going to return to you a float, right?
Like,
just so we can, yes, Mario.
For example, if I were to do algebra on this thing, so I would have to use casting in order to get my correct answer. Is that right?
There is libraries or modules, which we'll talk about later, that allow you to do some of the more complex tasks like algebra specifically. So you don't have to go through all these extra hoops. But in theory, if you want to do something like algebra and code it manually, and you're doing some of these methods, then yes, ideally you're probably gonna want to start converting some of these values depending on what you're doing.
Okay. Thank you.
Roger,
Yes.
with the float command there, is it only going to return 1 decimal point, or can you make it specify like 2 decimal points or 3 decimal points?
Yes, you can specify the decimal points. There's a specific method for it. Let me see. This is the first.
No, I was just wanting to know if we could do it.
No, you could, and I'm glad you asked that question because it's gonna branch me up to a way of how to find some of these answers. So by the way, I want to give a quick disclaimer. You're not expected to know everything. Software engineering, software in general, tech, as you guys all know, it is constantly developing. There's always the new and better way of doing things, right? Even the languages themselves. We're running on Python 3.13. If you're running on a version of Python from like 2.1, you're not going to be able to do the same things as you're doing now. There's some things that might not have been existing during that version of Python, right? Python, languages, frameworks, you guys might not know what frameworks are, but all these different types of technologies are constantly evolving, and there's new versions of different things. Some things are no longer used or deprecated. Some are And because of that, these are one of the jobs in life that you're never going to be a subject matter expert. There's always going to be something new to learn. So if you enjoy learning new things, this is perfect for you. Uh, but you're never going to be expected to know everything, and that's okay. One of the cool things about doing this job is, uh, that you're always learning something new, and it provides you with some form of mental stimulation. But with that in mind, you also need to know how to find the answer. And most things in tech is going to be there's going to be a lot of documentation. For those of you who are military, who made it pretty far into your military service, um, you probably realize that the higher in rank that you got, the more it came into be how to be able to find the answer, right? Uh, as a staff sergeant, when I went through ALC in the Army, there was a whole part that we were tested on that we didn't really learn, right? They briefly talked over it, and then when we got tested out, they gave us a bunch of field manuals, and it was the entire test itself was control Fing through this field manual to find the answers. And what they really harped on is like, hey, you're not expected to know everything, but you should know where to reference it, right? And how to find that answer. So you're going to see me do this a lot. There's certain things that I don't always use, right? There's going to be a lot of methods in Python, a lot of modules and libraries that are out there for you, but you're not always using them. So you're not going to know them off the top of your head. I'm not constantly always working with decimals. So I'm gonna show you, let's see that. I want to know how to do that. The website I like to reference a lot is gonna be W3 Schools. This is my favorite website. I would bookmark it if you're gonna be doing a lot of learning and whatnot. But this is W3 Schools. It's a pretty nice website. It has almost every single language on here. There's different other libraries and frameworks that you can look through. But when you come here, you want to navigate to Python. And it's going to bring you to a long list of different things that you can do in Python. Right? A lot of this stuff is going to be, stuff that doesn't really matter to you. But I want to know a little bit more about floats. How do I do something with floats? So I can go to Python, and I can go to, is there a float section? I don't think so. Let's go to data types. It might have what I'm looking for. Floats. Let's see. Now what I'm looking for, let's go ahead and type in Python float numbers. It's going to show you that some of these have different methods that you can do with them. And I'm not finding what I'm looking for here. I might have led you guys astray. Python methods. Float decimal. Let's see. How to round. What is data types? Round. You can round. This is under. There should be something else here. So you are able to round, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'll get you an answer right now. I have to go to the documentation. Time is 8:01. Let's go ahead and take our second break and last break of the night. Let's go ahead and come back at 8:11. I will see you guys in a little bit. Again. So before we went on break, a question was asked about truncating a decimal point. So there's a handful of ways of doing it depending on what you're trying to do. So the math.trunc method will remove the decimals value. So if I had like 5.68 and I use the trunc method on that, it would remove the 0.68, but it'll return to me a whole number, which is exactly what you're looking for. Todd wanted more of the round method, which sounds to be a little bit better, right? A little bit better. I don't even think that's how you say that. You want to use a round method. So you pass the number that you're trying to run round for, then to what digit you're trying to round up to, like 2, 3 decimal points. This sounds to be the much better way of doing things. And then I also saw another method using string interpolation by David in the chat, which you can use. But you can see there's different ways of doing this, which really opens up another topic of conversation is that when it comes to your coding, guys, there's no right or wrong answer. There's going to be different ways for you guys to reach these similar outputs, right? And there's different ways to get there, right? Whether you decide to use in this specific scenario the round, the trunk function, interpolate string, or if you want to do some math, that's going to be up to you guys too. Like it's really there's no right or wrong answer, specifically at this point of your journey, right? I've gone to ask questions like, but is this ideal, Roger? Is this good code? Should I be doing it this way? Now I can give you an answer to that, yes or no, like not great code, but it works. And that's really where you guys should be worrying about right now, your point of your journey. You don't have to ensure that you're like, industry standard code, like this is optimized, this is good, this is how it should look like. This is the best version of my code. That's okay if it's not. You want to make sure that you're able to get from point A to point B, right? Can you solve the problem, right? It might not be the sexiest code out there, but it's okay, right? It'll get the job done, and that's okay, right? But as long as you understand what you're doing, that's all we're really looking for. And the first part of your journey with Code Platoon. Once you guys get into our programs, you start working with the code, you're going to learn what is the correct way of doing things, right? What good code should look like, the optimized version of your code, how to think about the complexity of your code, whether it's good with time, whether it's good with space, and whatnot. But as of right now, that is something that you don't have to worry about. Just make sure you know how to reach a solution, right? But good stuff, good stuff. Let's go ahead and pick off from where we left off. We've got 50 minutes and we still have a good amount of stuff to cover. We're about halfway through. So we covered float. Here is another way of doing things. So here we have a code snippet. We have the 1 and the 3, but this time instead of typecasting the 3, they're going to typecast the 1. And this is going to give you a much more different result than what you expect. What do you think is going to happen when I run this code block right here?
Will it typecast it as a string, and the 1 as a string rather than a integer?
It's gonna
It
be
will.
13.
Yes, Lamia, is that correct? Did I pronounce your name correct? Lamia?
It's Lamia.
Lamia. Okay, okay. Yeah, it's gonna give you guys 13. All right, it's gonna grab the 1 and the 3, and it's gonna quite literally add them together side by side. It's gonna concatenate them, right? Because it's gonna interpret 2 different strings and it's gonna put them together, and it's gonna return to you the string of 13.
Yes.
So it won't actually add it like you would think math-wise. It's going to join the strings together and make it into one combined string. But yeah, you are correct, Jose. On the first part, it's going to typecast it to a string. But now when it's both strings together and you're adding together, it does what we call string concatenation, right? It's going to concatenate both strings together to create one big string. Now, a limitation when it comes to typecasting that you need to keep in mind. Here we have a decimal in the form of a string, but they're typecasting it to an integer. Will this work? No, right? You have to ensure that the data value that you're trying to convert into another data type can actually fit the container that you're trying to convert it to, right? Integer, as we know, is a whole number. So because of that, when I try to convert the string of a float to an integer, I'm going to get an error, right? Because they won't know how to do it. Value error, invalid literal for integer with base 10. Now, this sounds a little cryptic. Just know that it's not able to convert a decimal string into an integer because it doesn't know how to work with a decimal value and the numbers behind it, right? So be aware of that. When you're typecasting, make sure it's actually able to convert to that value. Booleans, right? This is the most basic type in Python, which is Booleans. Another version of way thinking about true or false is going to be 1 or 0.
I have a
right?
question.
I have an answer.
About where you were just at.
Yes.
So where it was integer and it was 4.56 with the decimal, you typecast an integer int. Would this line of code work if you typecasted it float instead of integer?
Yes,
Okay, gotcha.
it will, because it knows how to handle the decimal and the 5-6, because
Gotcha.
floats half decimal. But you're correct.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, so the Booleans, as I was talking about, you can be thought of them as one or zeros. One representing true, false representing zero. Really, it's just one or another, right? It's just two sides, two different sides of the coin here, one or the other. And I showed you guys this code snippet earlier, how you can set a Boolean to keep track of the state of something, right? If you're thinking about maybe like in the game, right? Should your player be able to move if he's not alive? No. You might want to create a variable called is alive that's set to true if he is alive, if his HP is above a certain threshold, right? So we could do something like that. We could say is alive is equal to true by default. We can say HP is equal to 5. We can say if HP, and I know we haven't talked about if statements, that's okay, we'll get them. If HP is less than or equal to 0, is alive is equal to false. Else is alive is equal to true. You could do something like this, right? Where you can check if he's alive or not. If is alive is equal to true, then you can say something like move. Else print you're dead. Now, some of these concepts are obviously out of scope right now, but I'm just trying to show you how you could use a Boolean to check a certain condition to do different things. Obviously, move doesn't exist. We'll talk about functions later on, but Booleans allow you to keep track of the state of something, right? And then use that state to reference it and do one thing or another. Any questions about Booleans so far?
Would this be a scenario with Booleans like when you said earlier, not to clear all outputs because they depend on the previous variable? Would like Booleans be an example of that?
Not necessarily. Let me show you what I meant by that. Let's say I have a variable here called name is equal to actually Todd, right? I'm gonna go ahead and run it. Now it doesn't do anything, but it ran this. So it created this variable and saved it in my memory. Let me go ahead and open up another code block. I'm gonna say print name. And it's able to print Todd out. Now, what happens if I clear the output and I don't run name is equal to Todd, but I try to print name? Oh, what the heck? Okay. That did not do what I thought it was gonna do. I guess it's working. This did not work before, so I'm a little confused. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure why it worked, but it's working now. So disregard that what I mentioned. It used to, at least before, if I didn't run this code here and I try to print it out, it won't know what name is because I never defined it. That's how it used to work, and now it's not giving me that issue, which is just another prime example of what I mean, that code changes, right? Versions of Python change, Jupyter Notebooks version change, now it's working. In other classes I've taught, this would not have worked. But another prime example why you're always learning. What was that, Jason?
No, thank you. I totally understand what you're saying. Like I was assuming it was going to not show up too as well. Like it was going to not have the memory of where Todd was once you cleared out those outputs. But I totally get what you're saying.
Awesome. Good stuff. All right, so numbers. We talked about numbers already, what they are. Let's check the types of all these numbers. When I run it on the 23, you notice that it's an integer, right? Int, right? For a whole number. For the float, it's going to return float. Here, we're trying to add 34 and 65. What is this going to return to me?
It's going to error out because you're trying to add two different types of variables.
Not exactly. It's going
wow.
to,
Okay.
so floats and integers, they definitely could be added up. You just need to understand that the result's going to be different, right? It's going to return 40.5 because it's going to add a float to it. So it has to know how to handle that 0.5. Now, if I try to add a string in a float, yes, I would get an error then. Whoever came on the mic, I didn't get your name. I'm sorry. So
That's
strings.
me.
Todd. Okay, yeah. So if it was a string Todd, it would, right? But it definitely could add numbers, right? It just has to know how to handle the decimal. And as I mentioned before, it's going to default to a float value. But this won't work because this is a string. And we need to convert the string to an integer or float to do this. But that was a good guess. That was a good guess. All right, mathematical operators. So you kind of already started seeing me do this very briefly without us talking about it. But you can absolutely do some form of math, right? We saw addition, and quite simply, you could also do the same thing with subtraction using the minus, right? That doesn't change. Now, there's some interesting ones here for doing the other operators. If you want to multiply, you're going to use the asterisk, right? Because obviously the x, we might be using it as a variable name, or it could be a string. So we need another way of doing this. The asterisk is used to represent the x within a multiplication operation, right? So when you want to multiply something, you're going to use a single asterisk. Now, you might also find yourself in a situation where you're going to want to use an exponent. How do we use an exponent? That's going to be two asterisks, right? That's going to allow you to do 2 to the power of 5, right? How will we do that? We could do 2 to the power of 5, right? So it's going to treat that 5 as an exponent because it's followed, uh, it was, what was the word I'm looking for? It had the double asterisk beforehand, not followed by. But yeah. So we can use exponents using double asterisks. We can multiply with one asterisk. Now, if you want to divide, we're going to use the forward slash operator here, and that's going to divide. I'm going. I can show you this. This gave me 32. If I wanted to divide, let's say I'm going to divide 10 by 5. This is going to return to me 2, right? So we're able to divide. I want you to notice too, though. Notice by default, it returns to me a float, right? Right. So keep that in mind. It's going to return to you a float because there is a chance that when you divide something, you might get a decimal value back, right? It's not always going to divide something evenly. So by default, it's going to give you a float in the event that if your division doesn't divide evenly. Now, there's another way of dividing, which is floor division. Let's go ahead and do 10 divided by 3. Notice that I get 3.333, right? This is not an even division. We can do floor division, which is another fancy word of saying rounding down. I'm going to divide to the floor, right? Round down. It's just another way of verbalizing that, right? So if I add an extra forward slash here, it's going to divide it, but that extra forward slash is going to let it know, hey, you need to round down, bad boy, right? And we see here, we got 3 now, right? So there's 2 different ways of doing this. So if you want to just divide and get the actual division for it, you're going to get a weird number. But that's what you're looking for? Absolutely. Right. But if you want to round down, you can do the 2 forward slashes. Now let's use that round method that was mentioned earlier. We can use round. And I want to get the result of what comes back after dividing 10 by 3. Right? So we can do that by wrapping this in parentheses. Why would I want to wrap this in parentheses? Well, when you're working with math,
So your operations don't get mixed up.
yeah, you don't want the operations to get mixed up because it's very easy for your interpreter to not know which item to handle first. If you wanted to do something very specific, you want to follow the rules of PEMDAS. For those of you who have been out of the game for a hot minute like me, right? PEMDAS stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction, right? It pretty much just lists out the order of operation from highest priority to the lowest priority, right? Parentheses. When working with math, the first thing that's going to take priority is whatever is going to be in parentheses, followed by any exponents, multiplication, and so on and so forth, right? So the acronym PEMDAS is really how this is going to work. So I want this to divide this, right? And the math operator, I'm sorry, not the math operator, the round operator, it took 2 different arguments. and this is the first time we see something like this. We've been using methods that only take one thing inside of them. Uh, there's methods that's going to take multiple things within the parentheses. Round does exactly that. To separate the items that you're passing in within parentheses, you want to split them up with the comma, right? Round is one of those methods that takes two different inputs. One is going to be the input you're trying to round down. And the second input is going to be to what decimal point value do you want to round down to, right? So different methods work different ways. Some methods don't need any type of input. Some methods need one, some might need two, some might need five or more, right? Typically, if there's a method, we'll talk about creating methods later on ourselves. But with creating methods, your method should not be taking like more than 3 or 4 items in there because then it starts becoming too crazy, right? But there is methods that take multiple different inputs. This one specifically takes two. We see here the syntax. The first one, number, require the number to be rounded. And the second one is digits, right? Optional, the number of decimals to use when rounding the number, right? By default, it's set to 0. But if you want to round it to a very specific number, you want to pass in that value there, right? So I can say comma 2, and we can see 3.33. So it's going to round it down to the second number. Do I have any questions about any of these operators that we talked about so far?
Yeah, real quick. Why is it printing it? Is that just built into that Jupyter notebooks?
Thank you for asking that. That was actually be my next point. Yeah, so here's the one of the biggest downsides to Jupyter notebooks is it's going to automatically run what's in there and print it out. And that's no bueno, right? Because that builds bad habits. So I want you guys to be aware of that. So although I don't have a print statement, it's going to print it out anyways. And that's a Jupyter notebook thing. I recommend that you guys build the habit and make sure that when you're printing out, you put the print statement here. Or just use a regular Python file. And the way to do that really is you might want to create another tab here. How do I do that? On the top right, you should be able to see what looks like a booklet, right? You click that, it's going to create 2 different tabs side by side, like 2 windows almost. What you can do is you can drag your Python file you want to use to that side of your code space. And you can have the curriculum on the left, and on the right, you could have whatever you're writing on. So this way, it kind of builds good practices. We only have Jupyter notebooks and code cells, so I can teach you during the course. But I do highly recommend is maybe just write your code in a Python file to ensure that you are building good practices. Because I cannot stress enough how many times I have people forget to write the print statement when they're actually working in Python files because they get so used to the crutch of Jupyter notebooks automatically printing it out. So just be aware of that. That's a very good question. Thank you for bringing that up. All right. So, like you learned in math class, Python performs arithmetic operations according to the rule of operations, right? So this is your PEMDAS. I explained. I kind of jumped the gun here, but we can see how that works in real time. So parentheses is going to work on the parentheses first because that's the first order of operations. So it's going to add 70 plus 1. After that, it's going to do the exponents, right? So it's going to do 8 to the power of 5, followed by any kind of multiplication. We don't have any afterwards. Then it's going to be division. So then it's going to divide the 71 by 4.3. And then whatever comes back from this is going to be added to whatever came back from the exponents. So that's how it's actually working under the hood. So if you want to ensure that a certain operation happens before everything else, make sure you're working with parentheses to make that happen.
So it's smart enough to do PEMDAS by itself. You don't got to actually write it in order.
Right. So here we have the floor division as well. Other examples, 23 divided by 4 gives you a rounded down version of 5. And here's another one that did not cover. this is what's known as the modulus operator, right? The modulus operator is represented by the percent symbol, right? This is very common through multiple other coding languages as well. What the modulus is gonna do is it's gonna divide your numbers, but what it's gonna return to you is gonna be something different. What the modulus remainder returns is gonna be the remainder of your division, right? Let me say it again, the remainder of your division. So before I run this one, I'm gonna add a code block here. I'm gonna say 10 modulus 5. So this will divide 10 by 5, but as I mentioned to you guys before, it's gonna return the remainder. So what should this return?
0.
0,
Yeah,
right? Because
zero.
Nothing.
5,
Yeah, nothing.
yeah, 5 is gonna divide 10 pretty evenly with nothing left over. So it will return something, but it's gonna be 0, right? And this comes in handy in a little bit. I'll show you. Notice here, 23 modulus 2, that is not an even division. It's going to return 1, right? Because it's going to fit into the 23 11 times, right, with a remainder of 1. So the modulus operator is a very good way to see if something is even, right? I want to say that again. The modulus operator is a very good way to see if something is even, right? If you get a number and you do that number modulus 2, if it returns 0 to you, that's going to let you know that, hey, this number is an even number because they divide it evenly, right? I say that because this is checking if something is even is actually a pretty common thing to do in coding. So if you ever have to check even numbers, use the modulus operator. I do have a couple hot mics. I don't know who it is. Just be aware that you guys do have your mics unmuted. Do mute them until you guys are ready to talk. Thank you, guys. All right. Strings. Strings, formerly called string literals, are immutable sequences of 0 or more characters. All right. There's 2 keywords you need to think about here. The first one is a sequence of characters. That's going to play a big part when we start talking about lists later on. But it is a sequence of characters, right? Each one of the characters in a string has a point in sequence. In regular day-to-day life, when we start a count of something, we start at 1, right? If you have 5 apples and you start counting from left to right, you're gonna say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? That's a sequence of 5 different apples from left to right, correct? Everyone with me?
Yes, sir.
In Python, we don't start at 1. That's weird, right? We start at 0. Don't ask me why. I didn't do this. I just work here, right? But we start at 0, right? That's known as index notation, right? 0 index notation. So whenever we count the sequence of characters or the sequence in the list or anything like that, we typically start at 0. So be aware of that, right? Notice that here we have a nice little picture of a string of the word Python, right? The top numbers here shows you the positions of each character from left to right. The P is at position 0, right? And then every word after that increments by 1, right? This is the 0 indexing. Now, you can also do backward indexing. Now, with backward indexing, we start at -1. Why do we start at -1? Because the 0 index already refers to the regular order from left to right. So from right to left, we need another way to start. So we start at -1, right? The negative specifies that you're going from the back to the front, right? And then the 1 is just the starting one because 0 is already taken for the positive values. Make sense? So the P here is at index 0. If we were looking at it from negative indexing or backward indexing, it would be -6, right? So the count is going to vary depending on whether it has a negative or a positive. The positive number will go from left to right. Negative numbers will go from right to left. Do I have any questions on indexing?
Why would you ever use a backward direction indexing?
That's a good question. In your case right now, at the state that you are in, you would probably use it if you want to let's say, reverse a string. Backward indexing also helps with different data structure algorithms. It's a little out of scope right now, but some of you guys, if you looked into some of this stuff, you might have heard of something called bubble sort, sorting a sequence of items from left to right, from lowest to highest. If you guys make it into our programs and you go through one of my other classes I teach foundations of programming, I'll talk about bubble sort and how we can use negative indexing. But there's different ways where you might want to start at the back of the list to do something. Like I said, it's a little out of scope right now, but there are some different situations where you might find yourself to start from the back of the list of something. And that's where we come in handy. For now, the only thing that will suit you right now is really reversing a string. You might encounter problems like that when working with coding. Though I wouldn't be surprised if the interviewer for the lab technical assessment asks you, "Hey, reverse this string," right? You might want to reverse it using a -1. And I'll show you guys how to do that. But it's a very common beginner problem for beginners in coding.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So that was the sequences, right? The sequence of characters. That was the first thing I wanted you guys to pay attention here to. The second thing here is the keyword of immutability, right? Immutability means that it can't change. And that's very important, right? Strings are one of those variables or values, to be specific, that you're not able to change, right? Whenever you create a string, you can't change it. And let me show you what I mean. Let me add a code here. I'm gonna say name is equal to John. And print name out. So I create a variable here called John. After I print it, I'm gonna call the variable name again, right? I'm calling the same variable I already created. But this time I'm going to say David. And I'm gonna print name again. Now, we have here a variable with a string of John, and then we have a variable of a string of David. And at first glance, you might think, oh, you changed the string. No, I actually didn't change the string, right? The string didn't change. I created a new string and reassigned it to the variable called name, right? And I can see that right here. I'm gonna print it out with the ID. If you guys recall, the ID shows me the location in memory. You're gonna notice that these differ, right? These are two different variables, right? In two different places of memory. So when I first create the variable called name that has John assigned to it, and then I say name is equal to David, I didn't change this variable into something else. I reassign the value to this variable. So you might be thinking, well, what happens to the string of John then, Roger? Well, what happens is when it gets reassigned, the string, it actually still exists for a while. Not a long while, but a very brief moment, it still exists. But it loses its memory address, right? We no longer get a way to reference that string in our memory, right? We pretty much have no way to reference it. It's still in our memory for a brief moment, but we can no longer grab it. We change the variable name of name and assign it to a different string, right? So we just shifted the address to somebody else, right? Kind of like homes, right? When someone moves out and a new person moves in, that new person is now the person assigned to that name or that house in this scenario. But we no longer get access to that person. Who knows where they went? They probably move out of state. Same concept here. We lose access to the string of John. What happens is because we no longer have access to it, and this is nothing really that doesn't really concern you guys. Hold on, give me a second. My dog's barking. What is happening here behind the scenes is that John, the string still exists, but it no longer has something to reference it. So it's going to be marked for garbage collection, right? What's happening in your computer is it periodically checks for unused pieces of data, I guess is the best way of explaining it here, that is no longer used or relevant to your code. And then it occasionally just dumps the garbage, right? This is to ensure that your storage is optimized, right? You're not keeping track of different things that don't matter anymore. If you no longer have an address for something, or you no longer are keeping track of something, then it's no longer needed. So by default, it's going to be marked for garbage collection, and your computer is going to just delete it eventually, right? So that's what's happening here, right? And that's important to know, right? Because what if I try to do name is equal to, let's say, actually, I'll show you guys in a bit. Just know as of right now that you cannot change strings. When you do something like name is equal to a different string, you're not changing the string, you're actually recreating something. It's just good to know how the stuff works under the hood. Anyone see those shows called How It's Made? Yeah, I love those shows. So back to the indexing. So we talked about the immutability and we talked about sequencing, right? So here is my sequence of characters, right? Or in other words, this is my string here. This is my basic string. And I'm going to print out the variable my string, but notice that I'm doing something with some brackets. So thanks to the fact that strings are a sequence of characters, they all have an assigned location, right? As we mentioned before on the picture above, P was at position 0, Y is at position 1. We are able to use that indexing to grab certain parts of our string, right? And we do that via a method called bracket notation, right? Bracket notation. When you want to access a certain part of a string, or a string specifically here, you're going to call the variable that the string is assigned to, right? And then you're going to open up these square brackets, and you're going to specify the position of where you're trying to access. So in this line right here, we're going to grab my string index 0, and this is going to be the T here, right? And then you see here that every single time that we run this print statement is grabbing the next index. So it's going to quite literally grab the keyword or the word here of this. And we see here that prints out THIS. And there's 5 print statements here, but it printed out 4, right? That's because the item at index 4 is the space. So although you can't visually see it, there is a space here, right? And where it's printing out that space. So the characters in a string, it's going to count the spacing as well, right? Anything from the start to the end of your quotation marks all count as the characters of your string, whether they are a space, whether they're an alphabet letter, a number, a special character, all of those are individual points in your string. Therefore, they all get their own position. So the term immutable means that once a string is created, it cannot be changed in place, right? Or we can't change it essentially. Look at this right here. Here we have the string. This is my string. They're going to say, hey, my string at index -1. What is going to be -1 right now? That's going to be the last character, which is this period. We're going to try to change that period to an exclamation mark, right? We're reassigning it, quote unquote. But we get an error. That's because, as I mentioned, strings are immutable, right? You can't change different points of the string. You can only reassign a new string to the entire variable, but you cannot change the string. And they say that because you're going to try to do something like this again. And there's going to be some methods that you think like, oh, they're changing my string. They're not. It's a very important concept, and you'll see why in a little bit. But as you see here, as of right now, when I try to reassign whatever is at index -1, I get an error. It says string object does not support item assignments. It can't change it. Right? And then here it gets reassigned to this is my change string, and we can see it prints both of them out. So we talked about accessing different points of our string using index notation, right? We printed out 5 different lines. Each line was different, was pointing out to a different point of our string. But we can also use a different method called slicing, right? Slicing is going to allow us to grab a part of a string from a start to an endpoint, right? Once again, we're also going to use bracket notation, and we're going to use the indexing to grab the points that were within our string here. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a start and an end, right? We do that with the colon within our bracket, and you see that here, right? The my string, it's still this up here. That's how we defined it earlier. So we're going to try to grab whatever's at index 11, and it's going to stop at index 18, right? And when I run this, you see I print the whole string out, and then let me wrap print around it for good measure. Oh, I have this. There we go. But notice when I print the whole string, but when I grab index 11 to 18, it only grabs changed, right? Because this starts at index 11. Now, something to take into account. The stop point. It's not going to grab what's at index 18. The stop point in your string slicing refers to the up to but not including is what I like to call it. Let's look at the string itself. We start 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 is a C, right? So we grab that C. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Now, I guess it's hard to see here, but there is no space that we grabbed. That 18 is the spacing, but it didn't add it to it. It's hard to see here because obviously there's all this space here, but it's not going to grab it. Let's do 17. Index 17 is the D. But when I run this, notice the D doesn't come out, right? Because the stop refers to up to, but not including. So if I want to make sure that I grab everything from here, I have to go up to the space to grab everything before it, right? That's very important to know. Now, there's another optional piece of input you can grab it or you can give in here. And that's going to be the step, right? So let's look at the syntax for slicing. Here's the syntax here. You grab the string you're trying to slice, and then you give it a start, a stop, and a step, right? The start and step, or ignore this part here. The step is an optional parameter, right? So that's an optional item. We didn't give it the step, right? But it still works. By default, this step is set to 1. The step refers to how many characters it's going to step over as it slices through your string. So because it's set to 1 by default, it's going to grab the C, it's going to step to the right once, so it's going to go to H, it's going to step to the right once, it's going to grab A, and then so on and so forth. So it's stepping to the right once every single time, because that's the default setting for this. But if you want to change that, you're going to add this option parameter by using the another colon, just like we see here. And I can override this and set it to 2 instead of its 1 default. And now when I run this, I get something different. I grab the C, I step over twice, so I go to H and then A. And we see that's what the next item that I grabbed. Then we step over again. We go from A to N and then G till we step over twice. and that's the next one, and so on and so forth. So the step refers to how many numbers you're going to step over as you grab the slice. Do I have any questions on slicing? Okay. All right, let's finish off this part of slicing and then we'll be done for the day. So we can add to the step. We can also leave certain points of our slicing empty. Notice here that for this one, we leave the start point as empty. And then the second value here, the value to the right side of the colon is 4, right? There's no item between the to the left side of the colon. So there's no specific start point. So by default, it's going to start at the very beginning, and we're going to go up to, but not including, index 4, and we grab the this, right? I didn't specify where to start, but by default, it's going to be set to 0, so it's going to start at the beginning. We can also do the same thing. Oh, my bad. What am I doing? Would like to change sense. I don't know what it's telling me there. We can also say index 4 and all the way to the right. And notice that I grab from index 4 to everything to the right. Right? So you can do this both ways. You can leave the start or the end empty depending on what you're trying to grab. So we're able to slice different points of this string. Now, this isn't changing anything. Be aware of that. This is not changing my string. I'm not reassigning anything. I'm just grabbing different points of it and displaying it. Right? This is not changing the string. The string still stays the same. We can also use negative slicing here. And if you see here, we're going to start at -6. Right? So it starts at -6. So the first one is going to be -1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're starting at -6, and then we don't specify the end, so it grabs everything to the right. Right? So we are able to do negative as well. So the indexing, as you saw here, we can do it from the start or the finish.
So even if you're doing backward-ended indexing, it's still gonna pull left to right. Does that make sense?
Yes, you would have to specify how to change it, and that comes to the next part. Reversing the string. I mentioned this earlier. I think to you, David. Here, we're not going to specify the start or the end, but I'm going to step backwards. And notice what this does, because we didn't specify the start, I'm going to start at the beginning. I didn't specify the end, so I'm going to grab everything up to the end, but I'm going to grab everything by stepping backwards. So I go negative. And this logic allows me to reverse an entire string. So I did grab everything from start to finish, but I did it backwards. So I'm able to reverse a string using that -1.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused with the reversing strings. Can you actually explain that again?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, right, the syntax for slicing has 3 different parameters that we mentioned, right? Start, stop, and end. But the step we mentioned is how we want to step over items, right? By default, it goes from left to right, as we saw earlier, right? We set it to 1, to 2, and you saw the difference when we changed it to 2, right? Here, we didn't specify where we wanted to start, so we're going to start at the beginning. We want to grab everything from the beginning, is what this is saying. The next item afterwards, as you mentioned before, is the stop point. We want to grab everything up to the end because we don't have anything here. So by default, it's going to say, it's going to grab everything from left to right. It's grabbing everything. right? That is a default that is set into this when you don't pass in arguments. Now, notice that the step is the only thing that we change here. We're using backwards indexing. So by default, it's set to a positive number. So it's going to be 1 or 2, and it goes from left to right. But because we're using negative indexing, it's going to start at -1 and reverse it. It's going to go backwards. Does that make sense? By increments of 1. Because it was a positive number before, it's going to refer to the normal range of indexing, right? So notice that when we don't specify anything on the step, it just goes from left to right like standard because it starts at index 0, right? But because we set it to -1, we want to start at the end, what it's saying. Right? It's referring to whether you're going from left to right, depending on negative or backwards indexing or forward indexing. That's what it's referring to when it comes to negative.
Okay, so basically, the step, the step one is just like the motion that you're going. So you're gonna
Right.
just be going backwards,
Yes.
backwards one, backwards one, backwards one. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. That's a great way of putting it, Jose. Really, it's representing whether you want to use forward indexing or backwards indexing and what's the increment that you want to step over. That's a good way of putting it. All
And
right.
real quick with that stop, where you start stop step with the stop, it is up to but not including if it's positive. If it's negative, it includes it, right? Because it's counting for the 0.
The stop, no. The stop is referring to where do you want to grab up to?
Right, but if it's positive, it's up to but not including, right?
It doesn't matter
if I-
whether it's positive or not. Whether it's positive or not does not change anything about whether it includes it or not. By default, it does not include the stop. It is up to it.
I think I
Right.
understand what he's asking. If you go back and look at the backwards indexing, there is no 0. It's just 1 through.
There's no 0. And I did it on the thing, and if I put a negative, it shows, like if you were to put the stop at -6, it'll show -6. But if it's +6, it won't show 6.
It won't show 6. I'm not quite sure if I understand what you're getting at.
0, 2, 4, 6.
So when you show +6, it's also grabbing a space. So that won't by default be shown. Either way we're looking at it. But with -1, we're counting, if I'm understanding it right, if you're doing negative counting, the starting negative indexing, right? 0 is at the very end of the sentence. You're not counting any of the words that are after that. -1 is the first letter at the end of the string. Am I right with that, Roger?
Yes.
So then if you're counting back 6 from there, you're starting 1 at the G, and then 2, 3, 4 back to 6, which is S, right?
Right. So if you only have a stop and that's all you put in because that's the only one that's required, then if you use -6, it'll show the 6th.
This is -1, -2, -3, -4, -5,
It doesn't.
-6.
It doesn't
right.
show the 6. It stops just before the 6.
Right. Up to, but not including. So it's going to go up to here, but it's not going to include this value here at -6.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So whereas the start, it is, it does include that
Yes.
placement.
It's going to,
But
absolutely.
Yeah. And so right here we see let's go. The first semicolon is automatic without request. If there's nothing there, it's a 0. And so then okay, that's always going to be the start point right now on the map. So no matter where we're at in the map, 0 is our start point. And then our endpoint, our endpoint, or let's just say point B, is going to be -6, which in this instance is the S string. But is actually the spot before -6, which would be -5, which is the T, because the endpoint is always right before the stop, is really where we stop.
Yes.
Okay, and so our progress, our motion is that third spot then on this on the colon. So we're gonna go backwards one. So okay, makes sense. I appreciate it because it could still be 0, -6, nothing on the third one, and it would just still your start point and end point are still the same no matter what.
There's defaults to all this. All this is defaulted to 0.
Yeah,
All three
gotcha.
have defaults. So if you don't include anything there, it's gonna set to default 0. But I'm gonna stop you there, Jose, because we're 2 minutes over time. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.